Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Darth Nova here. This is another review on the classic Marvel Star Wars run. Taking a break from the convoluted Clone Wars timeline, I'm going back to a simpler time. Before, we had a Thrawn trilogy, before we had all of these works that we all know and love. This is a simpler time, a more innocent time. This is the very first annual for Star Wars. Now, I'm not going to explain how annuals work in comics. There's those who have read comics throughout most of their, if not all their lives, that know more than me. Basically, it's essentially a longer than usual comic that contains, multiple chapters in a long story. They're kind of like mini trade paperbacks. They're also more expensive than your usual comic. Like if a comic is, let's say, for an example, is $5, it could be like $10 to $12. That's just an example. They're usually a full story, that stand alone. Now, this annual that was released in 1979, not too long before the movie Empire Strikes Back and the novelization. This was basically, kind of like a break. Think of it as a filler arc in between another story arc, which I'll be talking about next time, where Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie go on an adventure on a certain planet that, if you've read one of the TCW graphic novels, you'll be familiar with because I reviewed it, sometime. If you're watching this a month ago or a few months ago, whatever, you'll know that one of the comics in TCW tie into this. And I think it's interesting that an author from TCW would do a prequel to a story that is over like 30 years old at the time. Now, this is 40 years old now. What do I think of the very first annual for Star Wars? I think it's a fun little story. It isn't anything groundbreaking, but I don't think every Star Wars comic has to be amazing. All it has to be is the story to be fun, maybe a little goofy. At least for me, I don't care if it's a little bit goofy. I mean, I call this the innocent era for a reason for Star Wars. And some of the stuff that you see in these old comics, you're like, wait, this doesn't look like a Star Wars, character. And the main villain does look like something you probably would see in a Marvel or DC comic that came out, during the Bronze Age. Now, what do I think of, the art? The art is gorgeous. In fact, annuals, from my experience, they usually, have pretty good art. No, I can't comment on all of them, but I think this one's pretty good. Now, the highlight for this comic for me is the lightsaber duel that happens in here, because I think having an aerial lightsaber duel is something that I think is really cool. It has never been done very much, if at all. And I like the fact that the artists and the writers of this story, played around, with it. Because, lightsaber duels was not something we saw very often. And if you've read these comics and in the order they were published, there was only one lightsaber duel up until this point. And that was with, Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, which was like, even though the lightsaber duel is very brief, because I think realistically, I think people wielding a laser sword would end pretty quickly. It wouldn't be a long fight. But I actually think it was pretty cool having a lightsaber duel. And the way it was depicted, it was a cool looking fight, in my opinion. Yeah, you can tell by the villain in this panel, she does not really look like she would belong in a Star Wars, story. But that's the charm behind this comic. I'm just going to show you this. Just the conclusion, spoilers if you care about that sort of thing. Yeah. It's a fun story. recommend it. You know what? The thing that's good about this story is you could read this without reading anything in the classic Marvel run. And I think that's the strength of this run, because a lot of these stories, you could pick them up at pretty much any point as long as you read them, like, during the start of a story arc. As a standalone story, it isn't bad. I think it's a fun ride. We don't learn anything new about these characters, but then again, you couldn't really tell us more information. At least they couldn't, so they only... Considering the fact that, I'm just going to comment, so far in this run, I applaud the writers for managing to craft something really, creative and something really interesting. It's a fun little story. It isn't groundbreaking, but for having one movie to work with, I gotta give them a round of applause, especially for this story, when all they had was A New Hope. And it seemed like back then, it seemed like the people that were drawing these comics and writing these stories, it seemed like they were having a lot of fun with this. And you could tell with this story. At the end of this, it does talk about how Obi-Wan came to the world with two peoples. Now, back then, before Empire Strikes Back, it was obviously Vader and Luke's father, who would later be named Anakin. Now, is this a contradiction? Well, no. Even though I don't consider the graphic novel that was tied into us as good as the actual story, which I think is fun, I think it was a brilliant way to actually explain, and try to kind of make Ahsoka kind of fit better in the expanded universe than, because without that retcon, I don't think it really works. I don't know. I think this is a good story, probably one of my favorites in this run. Like I keep telling you, there's nothing groundbreaking about these comics that I've read, but they're a lot of fun. And in fact, I've been having fun pretty much most of the time. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I'm really digging these comics now. I cannot wait to read more. I'm giving this a good rating. I think it's really fun. Next time, I'm going to be tackling the next story arc, which we're getting very close to the Empire Strikes Back comic book adaptation. I'm excited to actually get to this point. I cannot wait. This is Darth Synovia. Over and out. May the Force be with you always.